Welcome back to Rants and Reviews with Jake. Today we're going to be talking about Superman, going into the plot, and my thoughts on the movie as well. The movie starts off with Superman right after he lost his first fight. The movie explains that this is the first fight Superman has ever lost. I still don't love the fact that we start the movie with him directly after losing a fight, but I'll touch more on that later. Superman whistles to call Crypto, who then drags him back to the Fortress of Solitude. We see the Fortress of Solitude, which in my opinion looks great. I didn't have any problem with the fortress. I thought it looked phenomenal. And then we also see the Superman robots, which I also didn't mind at all. There were a couple jokes that they made and exposition moments they had that I personally didn't think made a whole lot of sense, but overall I didn't really mind the Superman robots. They were fine, and they were voiced well. So the Superman robots carry Superman inside and set him under the sun magnifying device to heal him. As he heals, the Superman robots play the message his parents sent with him when he was sent to Earth, essentially telling him that they love him and he needs to help Earth. And they play this because, as they say, it soothes him, and we'll get some callbacks to this later on in the movie. So Superman heals up, not all the way as the robots tell us, but like 84% I think is what they said, and then flies back to Metropolis to fight the villain that he was just fighting, the Hammer of Baravia. Next, we see Lex for the first time. Lex is controlling the Hammer of Baravia from Luthor Corps. He controls it with different letter number combinations. I heard some complaints about this, of people not liking the way that Lex controlled the Hammer of Baravia, and as we later find out, Ultraman. But I thought it was a cool way to show how intelligent he is, to show the different combinations that he's gone through and meticulously gone through thousands of different combat moves and things like that, while also studying Superman's fight style. I understand the complaints about it, but I personally thought it was a good way to show Lex's intelligence as well as his dedication to hating and trying to destroy Superman. We also get some Lexposition from the tech guys working for him, who basically just explain what's going on. Then we cut to the engineer who is working for Lex, who basically just has nanotech powers, who just found the Fortress of Solitude. Then, as Superman is getting whooped by the Hammer of Baravia, who we later find out is Ultraman, he gets helped out by a food vendor named Molly, who will be a bit of a part in the story later, but right now he's just a nice guy who likes Superman, who Superman has, I believe, saved before. Then the Hammer of Baravia, who is actually Ultraman, leaves and hops through a portal to go back to Lex Luthor. Next, we see Clark heading into work at the Daily Planet. His mom calls and they chat a little bit, and we also see Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane for the first time. Lois is in charge of the other two, and Jimmy Olsen is extremely charismatic with all the women in the office as well as others outside. Superman had previously intervened in a conflict between Baravia and Jarhanpur. Baravia is much more well-equipped than Jarhanpur. Later we see in the movie their military defense is basically just like a crowd of 70 people with pitchforks and stuff, and Baravia is very strong militarily. So Superman intervened in that conflict to help the people of Jarhanpur, despite Baravia being an ally of the United States. Then we see Lex talking with different people who are part of the United States military and government. Here we get a little more Lexposition about Luthor Corp, as well as his paramilitary organization Planet Watch, which consists of Ultraman, who is a clone of Superman, although we don't know that yet. He essentially is just in a bulkier black noir type costume, as well as the engineer, who I mentioned earlier, who has nanotech powers, and his Raptors, who are just regular soldiers in suits who can fly. He is pitching to the US government that they allow him to bring in Superman for questioning, as he is an alien and they don't know if they can trust him. Then we head back to Clark and Lois. Clark is making dinner for Lois at her house. Here we get a good bit of dialogue between the two of them in a scene that is about 10 minutes of pretty much just straight dialogue. between the two. David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan did a great job, and they have great on-screen chemistry. I just wish we had gotten to see a little more of it in the movie, as we only get a couple scenes of them being together as Clark and Lois. Clark lets Lois interview him as Superman. They argue a little bit about him intervening between Jarhanpur and Baravia, as well as other Superman issues. He gets pretty upset. All in all, I think this is a pretty good scene. I think it drags on a little too long. In a movie that's 120 minutes long, a 10-minute long scene of just dialogue can feel very long, especially in the movie theater. 10 minutes of one scene in a theater is a long time, so you have to really consider that when you're making a scene this long, although I do think it is very good. We do get some great dialogue, specifically from Clark, where he talks about how he didn't intervene on part of the US. He did it because people were going to die and he had to help them. This is one of the times where they actually got Superman right. Not necessarily his dialogue in this scene, but his actions with Baravia and Jarhanpur and him intervening to help people who can't help themselves. They also talk about how on social media a lot of people are berating him online and use the hashtag supershit. Clark gets pretty upset about this, supershit specifically, and gets very upset. This is one of the things that I thought wasn't the best with this movie, as Superman has been Superman in this universe for 3 years, and he's 30 years old, so he became Superman, or came out as Superman, when he was 27, which in my opinion is a little too late age-wise for the Superman story in general. Usually he starts much younger. But for a 30-year-old man and Superman, I think he gets a little too emotional when it comes to other people saying bad stuff about him. I do like a lot of the emotional scenes we get with him when it comes to like caring for other people and helping other people. We get some great emotional scenes that I'll touch on later, but I think in this instance, and when it comes to social media stuff, I think he gets a little too emotional. They continue to argue, and then Clark leaves. I actually really like the way they left this scene. It was one of the few times in the movie that ends on a low and doesn't immediately get cut with a joke. That's actually really good in a movie. You need some scenes to end bad, leaving you like, I need this thing resolved. I need them to resolve this. That's how a lot of scenes need to end, and that's how dialogue needs to end in movies, and that's not what we get very much in this Superman movie. It's a lot of, there's an important moment, there's a really big moment, and then it's just immediately undercut with a joke, and that doesn't always work. Next, Lex pulls up to the Fortress of Solitude with his girlfriend Eve, Ultraman, and the Engineer. They go in, destroy the Superman robots, take Krypto, and break into Superman's computer. You see the message that Superman's Kryptonian parents left for him. The Engineer uses the nanotechnology to decode the parts of the message that were previously destroyed. In this part of the message, Jor-El tells Clark essentially that he needs to prune Earth to be taken over and start harems of wives so that his super children can rule over the Earth. I hate this so much. I think it would have been a cool plotline if Lex had edited the message to say this so that he could use it as a slanderous campaign against Superman, shake his foundation of who he is as a person and who his Kryptonian parents were, what they wanted for him. I think that is all great. It could be a very interesting plotline. However, I think everyone else that watched this movie assumed it was a message that Lex had doctored. But so far, from what we have just in this movie, they may retcon it in the future, that is the official message that Jor-El sent with Clark. So his Kryptonian parents didn't send him there for the reasons that they did in the comics and pretty much every previous Superman iteration, which was to help the people of Earth, to bring them forward, and to save people. While Lex is doing all this, he has sent a distraction to Metropolis so that Superman won't catch him as he is in the Fortress of Solitude. This distraction, as we find out, ends up being a kaiju that is attacking Metropolis. Here we get Superman battling the kaiju. We get some creative moments from him as he is both attacking it, keeping it away from buildings as he can, and saving people. We get some really cool shots, a lot of which we saw in the trailers, unfortunately. And it's a pretty solid scene with him and the kaiju. Then Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, and Mr. Terrific, the Justice Gang, show up to help Superman fight it. They fight it for a little bit, Superman helping people, then focusing on taking the kaiju down, and then Mr. Terrific sends some bombs into its stomach and blows it up from the inside. Superman isn't happy. He wanted to take down the kaiju without killing it. And here's where we get a little more of Superman being Superman, which is also part of a pretty big problem in this movie, which I'm going to talk about more at the end of the video. Then we see the message that Lex found in the Fortress of Solitude on the news, and then people kind of immediately switch up on Superman and pretty much just hate him right away. And then he goes into a nearby building, and the Justice Gang follow, and they talk. Mr. Terrific tells Superman that, as far as he knows, he can't tell that the message is doctored and it is 100% real, and then Superman flies back to the Fortress of Solitude. Then we see the Baravian president leaving a press conference, going into his office, and taking a portal from a secret room in his office to talk to Lex, showing us that Lex is behind all of the resources Baravia has, and behind the Baravia-Jarhanpur conflict. Superman arrives at the Fortress of Solitude, sees all of the destroyed Superman robots, and realizes that Krypto has been taken. Then he goes to Lex's office, rips the door off the hinges, throws his desk, and we get a scene that we saw a little bit in the trailers as well. We get some top-tier rage baiting from Lex, and then Superman leaves to go search for Krypto as Lex just denies everything and wants to get a rise out of him so that he can get more footage of Superman being bad. Superman ends up coming home to find Lois, and they talk for a little bit. He could not find Krypto. He is absolutely devastated, and she makes him feel better. This scene is pretty great as far as dialogue. I really think it's just a good scene, and it shows who Superman is and how he cares about everybody, even a dog, even a squirrel. Like, he truly cares about everybody and saving everybody. However, directly contrasting all of the dialogue in this scene, there's as the movie said, a dimensional imp fighting the Justice Gang outside the window, and Superman just says, oh, it's no big deal, the Justice Gang have it covered, it's fine. But as we saw previously, the Justice Gang don't really care about actually saving people. They're just in it to take down whatever the threat is, including killing the threat. Superman's morals are like directly against this. He wants to stop evil in the most pacifistic way possible. He doesn't want to actually kill anybody or hurt anybody. He just wants to stop whatever evil or bad is happening. And in this scene, he just kind of ignores the threat and allows the Justice Gang to fight it, although we do get some good dialogue between him and Lois. And then he decides that he needs to turn himself in. He tells Lois he loves her and leaves to go turn himself in. He is taken by Planet Watch, as it is explained that the US government has no way of holding Superman or properly questioning him. So Lex takes him away, he goes through a portal, and Lex immediately puts him in a cell with Element Man, who I'm pretty sure is just Metamorpho, but they didn't call him Metamorpho for some reason. He turns his arm into kryptonite so that Superman can't escape. Here we see that Lex is studying Krypto, and he has a bunch of prisoners in this pocket universe. We also see his monkey online trolls. There was a rumor that was like a major plot line in the movie before the movie released, but it ended up just being like a shot in the background for a quick second, so I didn't really mind that. We also see that Lex has Element Man's child prisoner, and if he doesn't keep his arm kryptonite to keep Superman under control, he will kill his child. But he also keeps said child directly across from Superman and Element Man's prison cell, so that'll kind of lead to Superman's later escape. Then we get back to the Daily Planet, where we see Jimmy Olsen and Lois talking. Jimmy has a source that Lex is holding Superman in a pocket universe, and has a pocket universe for that matter. That source is Lex's girlfriend Eve, who really wants to date Jimmy. And then Lois heads over to the Justice Gang headquarters to enlist their help finding Clark. We get some good dialogue between her and the Justice Gang, specifically Guy Gardner. I thought Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner was fantastic in this movie, as well as Mr. Terrific. Mr. Terrific was one of the high points of this movie, and one of my biggest complaints about this movie is that Mr. Terrific and Guy Gardner were two of my top 3 favorite things in the movie. And in a Superman movie, Superman not being one of the top 3 best parts about the movie, that's a pretty big problem. They don't want to help Lois find Superman because reasons, and then Mr. Terrific decides to help, and they take his ship to the Luthor Corps military base, which is Superman's last known location, as Mr. Terrific has nanobot trackers in most of his friends' bloodstreams. Then we cut back to Superman and Lex. Lex has taken Molly, the guy from the start of the movie who helped Superman, and has him at gunpoint in front of Superman. Lex plays sort of Russian roulette with shooting Molly and then actually kills Molly right in front of Superman, and Superman cries. This emotional scene I thought was actually fantastic. It shows just how much Superman cares about innocent lives, regardless of how much he actually knows the person. Then we get back to Mr. Terrific and Lois following Superman's trail. They arrive at the military base, and we get a great scene of Mr. Terrific just destroying all of the raptors and guards at the military base. It's a really cool scene, and it was honestly one of the main highlights of the movie, and as far as memorable scenes, it's probably the most memorable. My biggest problem with that is it is basically a direct repeat of the Yondu arrow scene from Guardians 1, and a lot of the big scenes in this movie are basically just similar, slightly different shots from other James Gunn movies, which kind of brought me out of the movie a little bit. It kind of hurt my immersion. That being said, I do really like this scene. The two of them find the portal and open it up, and then we get back to Superman and Element Man. They talk a little bit, and Superman convinces him that if he gets rid of the kryptonite, then Superman will be able to save his son. He gets rid of the kryptonite, and while Superman stops being adversely affected by it, he is still damaged and can't really fly or even stand up. So Element Man uses his powers to heal Superman with rays of sun. Then Superman breaks out, saves Element Man's son as well as Krypto. Here Superman and Element Man fight the raptors, and then Superman gets stuck in a proton river, which is part of the pocket dimension Lex made. They almost get sucked into a black hole, but then they make it out and follow Mr. Terrific's T-spheres to make it out of the pocket dimension. Then Lois flies her and Clark to Clark's parents' house in Kansas. Then we see Lex absolutely raging out and kicking Eve out of the control room. She then calls Jimmy to give him the information that he wanted. Ultraman and Lex catch her giving Jimmy the information, and they put her in the dimensional prison. Jimmy calls Lois to give her the information that he just got from Eve. Superman wakes up totally healed, and we get a great conversation between him and his dad about his origins and his Kryptonian parents not mattering, and his interpretation of the partial message he received as a child says far more about him than what the actual message says. This is a great scene with his dad. Unfortunately, pretty much the whole thing was in the trailer, and it was also immediately undercut with more jokes, so you aren't really given time to breathe and just appreciate a good scene. Then we see that Lex has created a dimensional rift that is pretty much just gonna rip apart the Earth. And we also see that the Baravia-Jarhanpur conflict is escalating, and Baravia is about to invade, so Superman has to choose between who he's going to save. Metropolis is evacuated remarkably fast, and then we see Lois and the Daily Planet staff figuring out a story about Lex that they will publish in a little bit. Lois flies the Daily Planet staff out of there in the T ship. Superman flies in and catches a falling building right as it's about to crush a woman in her car, and then we get a really cool shot of Superman rising out of the dust. This is probably my favorite actual Superman shot in the movie, as I didn't really enjoy the cinematography. I thought the flight scenes looked a little bad with the fisheye, and I think all the action moved way too fast and was a little too blurry and just became a little hard to follow. And then the less than perfect CGI mixed with those things really just made the fight and flight scenes not look the best, but this particular shot I thought did look fantastic. Then Mr. Terrific and Superman fight the Engineer and Ultraman. Superman tries to redeem them briefly, telling them that they don't have to do this. They don't listen and continue fighting him. The Engineer uses her nanotech to fill his lungs to try and kill him, and then Superman grabs them both and flies up as high as he can into space. And then with both of them stuck to Superman, he flies back down and crashes into Earth, almost killing the engineer and hurting Ultraman a little bit as well. Here's where it's revealed that Ultraman is actually a clone of Superman, although the cloning process from Lex was imperfect, leaving him way dumber but stronger than Superman. We cut back to Bravia, where we get the shot from the trailer of the kid holding up the Superman flag, even as the rest of Jarhanpur runs from the conflict. The kid is standing up to Bravia, hoping that Superman will come and save them. Then Superman and Ultraman battle for a little bit, Superman losing a little more than he's winning, and we cut back to Jarhanpur right as they are about to begin getting killed by the Baravian soldiers. Green Lantern and Hawkgirl show up to save the civilians, and Guy Gardner tells the kid that Superman couldn't come, but he got an upgrade. There's another great Guy Gardner moment. Then Hawkgirl kills the Baravian president, which was kind of out of left field and didn't really make sense to me, as earlier in the movie, Superman was getting blamed and put on blast for merely interfering with a little conflict, whereas Hawkgirl just outright killed the Baravian president. Jimmy posts the story about Lex and how Lex had orchestrated the whole Baravia Jarhanpur conflict just so he would have an excuse to kill Superman. Then we get a pretty cool monologue from Lex about how he does envy Superman, but that Superman doesn't deserve any of the amazing gifts that he does have. Also saying that brain beats brawn every time, and because he's far smarter than Superman, he will always manage to beat him. Then Superman calls Krypto and tells him to destroy the mini drones that are monitoring the fight between him and Ultraman. Lex is using these drones to see what's going on in the fight so that he can control Ultraman. Destroying these drones will make it far easier for Superman to win this fight easily, as Ultraman is practically brain dead without Lex controlling him. I thought this was a kind of a dumb way for Superman to need to rely on Krypto, as Superman could easily just use his laser vision to destroy the drones instead of having to rely on Krypto and call him to destroy them. Superman actually locks in a fight for once in this movie, incapacitates Ultraman for just a minute, and then has a brief fight with some raptors, knocking them out and lasering them, although somehow they stay alive. It doesn't really make sense to me. He does like a really fast 360 spin that would like melt their brains out of their ears and then shoots them with laser vision, so I truly don't understand how they survived that, but all the raptors are alive, I guess. Then they get back to the fight with Ultraman, and right as Ultraman is about to defeat Superman, Superman pushes him in front of a falling bus, and Ultraman is pushed into the black hole that was spreading from the dimensional rift that Lex had caused. After Ultraman is defeated, Lex tries to run away to a portal, but Superman flies in and catches him. Mr. Terrific also flies in behind him, pushing the tech people aside so that he can close the portal and end the dimensional rift where it's at. Then we get a great monologue from Superman about how even though he's an alien Kryptonian, he's just as human as anyone, and his humanity is the best part about him. And unfortunately, right as we're about to get a counter from Lex, which would be an extremely interesting dialogue, Krypto jumps in and basically just thrashes Lex around the room, and this is another time where we could have had a really good emotional scene, and it was immediately cut off and destroyed by a crappy toss-away joke. Then Lex is arrested, and we see the civilians and Jarhanpur celebrating being free from under the Baravian thumb. Then we see the Justice Gang celebrating a little bit after the conflict, and Element Man joins the Justice Gang. Superman finds Lois, and he, quote, gives her an interview, if you catch my drift, and we get a great shot of them flying up into the air as they kiss. This was a great shot. We saw it in the trailers, but it was good, and I think any time that Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswet were allowed to just have chemistry on screen, they did a great job with it. This scene, the interview towards the start of the movie, and the time where Superman tells her that he loves her are the three only times where we get to see chemistry between the two characters, and they're almost always cut off by a joke or something else happening immediately after. I think if you let these two actors just work together and have chemistry, they're going to be great in any scene as Clark and Lois. I just wish we got to see a little more of that in this movie. Then we cut back to the Fortress of Solitude, where we see Supergirl for the first time. She flies into the fortress, calls Krypto, thanks Superman for watching him because Krypto is her dog, not his. Then she calls him a bitch and leaves. I don't think this is a great setup for the Supergirl movie. I think it just paints Supergirl as an irresponsible kid who likes to party and not as a superhero. It also explains that she likes to go to planets with red suns so that she can get drunk and party. This doesn't really paint the Supergirl character in a good light, and as this is the next DCU movie, I really don't think this scene was a good choice. But then we see Superman laying down and the robot's again playing a message from his parents to soothe him, just like at the start of the movie, but this time it is all footage of his Earth parents. I thought this was a pretty cool moment, showing that, you know, his Earth parents are his real parents. They're the ones who gave him the values he has, and they're the ones who have taken care of him his whole life. However, I do think the Jor-El start a harem message is still just ridiculous. And that's the last scene of the movie until our two post-credit scenes. The first of which is him and Crypto sitting on the moon looking down at Earth. I think this is a visually beautiful shot, but I think it's kind of stupid to have as a post-credit scene as it doesn't really build anything for the future. And then the second post-credit scene is just Superman and Mr. Terrific in the aftermath of the rift being closed. There's a slight misalignment in how the rift was closed, and Superman just says it's a little bit off, and Mr. Terrific gets pissed, and then they make up and it's fine. But those are the only two post-credit scenes in the movie, and I feel like they could have used those two post-credit scenes to actually build hype and anticipation for future DCU projects instead of just two throwaway jokes. Overall, I don't think the movie was terrible. I think it was like a 6 out of 10 movie and a 5 out of 10 Superman movie. They just didn't really hit the character quite how they should have. The whole point of Superman is that he's not a very complicated character. He's extremely powerful, and that's what a lot of people think makes him boring, but it's actually quite the opposite. Superman should typically be winning most of the fights he's in, and the real struggle that comes from his fights are saving people around the fight so that other people don't get hurt, as well as stopping whoever the villain is without killing them, because those are Superman's values. Also, when Kryptonite or a person who's just as strong as Superman get introduced, they're a super big deal, and they kind of change the whole landscape of how Superman fights. So having Superman lose all his fights in his first movie kind of undercuts that and makes it seem like it's less of a big deal when he just flat out loses a fight instead of people getting hurt while he's in the fight. All in all, I don't think the movie was too bad. I think the DCU still has a decent chance if they change their track a little bit and find directors that understand the heroes they're directing a little better. But all in all, the start to the DCU was super mid.